begin? The way that we begin is by placing our feet on the earth. And as we put our feet on the earth, and I invite you, or excuse me, the closest thing that is touching the earth, which is for most of us a floor, and I invite you to close your eyes. And really, like, allow yourself to close your eyes. You don't have to look at me. And even if you're doing the dishes or driving a car and listening, obviously you won't be closing your eyes, but I invite you to bring your energy inward. And just beginning to become aware of your breath. And as you become aware of your breath, you're also going to be aware of how you're seated. Perhaps you're leaning forward, perhaps you're leaning backward. This tells you how you meet or avoid the world. So really coming aware of how are you seated. I'm going to invite you to breathe. I think a lot of people are familiar with deep breathing. So just at your own pace, just taking some nice, deep, slow, luxurious breaths. And the reason I like to begin this storytelling class by closing your eyes is because storytellers are the seers of the world. They are the ones who are seeing past the illusion, past the words, past the narrative, and are listening for and are looking for all the different points of connection that make meaning. The ones that are providing context of the history. We're often looking into the future and planting seeds for the vision of possibility. And so in this moment, great storytellers, I invite you to stop looking outward at the world and come all the way in. And listen for that part of you that came alive when they saw the opportunity to join a community of storytellers. And I ask you, if you are one of those people that has so many stories on the inside that they just have to get out. You know you're carrying wisdom. You know you've got insight. You know that you have a gift and it's ready to be given. Or maybe that all sounded very intimidating, but there's some kind of itch, and you're beginning to hear a call, but it's coming in that foreign language of the muse, and you're trying to make sense of it. Or maybe you are that person who is in communication with the muse. And the ideas and the inspiration is nonstop. When you're driving your car, when you're washing your dishes, when you're going for a walk, the ideas for stories just keep coming and coming and coming. And maybe you're writing them down and maybe you don't know where to begin. Or maybe you've begun and you're halfway through or nearly at the end of some great offering. There's so many different ways. Or perhaps you're a cantadora. There's very few among us, those people who know that it is their role to carry forward the old stories, the old myths, so they can continue to walk among us. I want to ask you to listen for yourself in this time, to really listen for what called you here. And I'm going to start you off with a quote. And this quote is by Rebecca Solnit. We think we tell stories, but stories often tell us. They tell us to love or hate, to see or be seen, and often, too often, stories saddle us and they ride us and they whip us onward and they tell us what to do. And we do it without questioning. The task of learning to be free requires learning to hear them, to question them, to pause and hear silence, to name them, and then become a storyteller. I love to begin with this quote because it talks about the journey of the storyteller, that person who becomes conscious and aware that our world is made of stories, and that once we actually get to see them, we then get to choose our place in how we choose to relate or become part of them. The other quote I like to begin with is, the business of stories is not enchantment, and the business of stories is not escape. The business of stories is waking up. That quote's by Martin Shaw. And again, I love to begin with that quote because it really talks about the journey of a storyteller. You know, we have this romantic vision of the storyteller, you know, traveled from village to village carrying the history, you know, helping people remember. And now we're talking about, you know, then they went to become the bard where they were, you know, they had to entertain, you know, telling a little bit of truth, but making sure that it was always entertaining. And now we're talking about the role of the storyteller, which is this vision keeper, this story that's this way that as oh gosh, Jerry, thank you for changing your name on there. It really helps me. Jerry spoke to that part of how do we tell hard stories, you know, and how do we help people see what's happening while giving them the tools and the capacity and the courage to face it. And that takes a real special thing. And what I'll just say right now to that is that if there's anything that I understand about what to infuse a hard story with, it's beauty. If we can put beauty and grace into the stories, it gives people the tools that they need to be able to look and see the hardest things. So one fantastic example of that is a film called Life is Beautiful. You know, it's if you haven't seen it, it's so worthy. I can't believe I'd ever go run to see a film about the Holocaust. But it was so brilliantly made and beautiful and filled with so much beauty that, well, I just said that again. See, that I really believe it's beautiful. Okay, so here's what we're going to do today. I'm going to introduce you to the landscape of sacred storytelling and what is it when you take on story as a sacred art form. And we're going to talk about what is a story and why is it relevant to the times we're living in. And I'm going to talk about 3 things that people often don't take into consideration when they're working with an audience. And I will talk to you, I'll show you some Venn diagrams. I'll talk about what a story do. And then we might get into a little bit of working with story as initiation. So that's where we're going to go. And as always, please bring your questions to to us. So I always say, you know, it's like here I am at speaking at the role, you know, I'm at the spoke of the wheel, the teacher of story right now, but we all play different roles in the story and story belongs to all of us. So as your own wisdom emerges, by all means, please feel free to share it. Okay, a little bit about me is that I started off growing up on a farm in Vermont where I got to spend a lot of time with wilderness, and that really introduced me to my first lesson in listening. And from there, I ended up studying theater professionally very young. Got involved with a professional theater company, and we toured around the state of Virginia. And I got involved in studying with Sandy Meisner in New York City. My parents said, "Don't waste your time and our money on college if what you want to do is acting." So I went straight to New York City, worked off Broadway, begged my parents for an education, and ended up going to a very unique school called Prescott College in Arizona, where I got to do really what I was most dreamed of doing, which was bringing in social justice and environmental awareness in with this art of theater. And the reason is because I really began to understand the responsibility of storytelling when I was quite young. My best friend committed suicide, and I did what I knew how to do, which was I wrote a play, and I put my grief there. And that play ended up winning a playwriting festival. And I learned that responsibility, meaning that what you put out comes back to you. So if you put out good, the good will come back. If you put out grief, grief will come back. If you put out horror, horror will come back. And so there's a responsibility that comes with what you put out in the world. I learned the business, you know, of story while working off Broadway and in summer stock. When I saw that there was this magic that was happening there, and there was something that was very palpable that would happen in the room, and I couldn't quite understand it. So when I got into really involved in environmental justice and social justice, I really wanted to figure out how to match these different things that I could understand. And I want to understand, how do you focalize that energy that happens in the room? I ended up working with Al Gore at his Green Channel in San Francisco in this television network. And there I went in with this big question of what was the information that we need to give to people to give them the inspiration, to give them the motivation, to get them to activation. And it was very new. We were the first television network that had an online component. And so I got to see all the data of what people were taking in. And after a couple of years of doing that, I really realized that I was asking the wrong question. It wasn't what information do we need to give people. They were actually information overloaded. And actually, I learned the science of the brain is that we don't metabolize information and statistics and figures. We actually metabolize in the form of story, because in story we make meaning. So if we have any climate people among us, that I would say that one of the key things that so many good, well-intentioned people did in the telling of what is happening on our planet is that they've made data the story, rather than giving data a role in a much bigger story. So I ended up continuing on that path and really realizing that it was story that is what was most needed, and ended up leaving that kind of whole world behind and ended up entering into the world of sacred storytelling. And that's a really long story that I'm not going to get us too into, but I will tell you that it involved a lot of years living pretty much very much on my own, as I wrote a very, very large story about our times in mythic form. And that book is almost about to come out, so I'm really excited to share it with you guys. And in that, I would honestly say that, I teach with a lot of teachers and a lot of master teachers. And when people come in, I then have to say, I have to confess to you something, that while we, are definitely a voice for the stories themselves are the master teachers. And that's what I've learned in terms of when you come into relationship with story, something else happens. And that's what we're going to talk about, is that kind of like story almost as a form of mystery and understanding the world around us. To me, what I understand about story is that you can pretty much learn everything about how to become human through the process of telling a story. And so let's play with that today. Okay, so the Hawaiians, talking about ancient wisdom, the Hawaiians believe that words are so powerful that they can raise enough energy to slow the world or put it into motion. And if any of you are planning a trip to the Big Island anytime soon, I really recommend that you go to Mauna Kea, where they are actively engaging their old ancient ways of the hula and doing these things called protocol and chanting. And when you hear them chant, you understand that this is it's really something profound to get to see a culture that did not lose their ways and are putting ancient practices into place now. The Sicilians say that words are so powerful that they poke holes in the universe. So think about the last time you got into an argument and said something that couldn't be taken back. The Australians say that stories of the past must be sung to the present so that the future can exist. The Maori say that the words don't describe things, but the words are the things. And all the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. I'm going to say that again because it's some of the oldest wisdom that we have that speaks to humans' unique role on this planet. That all the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. And when you listen for some of the oldest words that we know of, such as abracadabra, this is from the old Arabic mysticism, which is, I create as I speak. So the words matter. So what is a story? Let's all get on the same page about this. This is a real question to you. What is a story? I would like to take their try at that. And the one thing I like to say in this moment is that there's no right or wrong answer. We all own story. We all own different parts of it. And one of the things that you can do, some of us who are introverts, we have to know exactly what we're going to say before we can raise our hand. Some of us are extroverts and will make sense as we open our mouths. What I invite you to do is take a practice at eloquence. And eloquence is that thing where you are not being so clever that you know exactly what's happening, but you're going to let the muse, the spirit, the ancestors, something speak through you. So you take a nice deep breath, you pause, and you go slow as you let what wants to come through comes through.
What was the question again?
What is a story?
I'll take a stab at it.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so it's something that wants to be told. You aren't telling it, it wants to be told. It's something that exists that you are creating into like reality. You're giving it honor, or like you're giving it attention. You're giving it meaning. You're giving it a way to express itself to others.
Great. So you just said so many different things. I'm going to play with a couple of them. One of the things that you said, one of the things I heard was like an urgency. There's something that wants to come through. You know? But then you also spoke, oh gosh, I haven't had coffee today, and so my brain just lost what you also said. You said that there was something about giving it meaning. So again, a story, it's going to take us on a journey. It's going to take us from A to Z. We didn't not just telling you about my trip to the post office for no reason. It's something that, again, there's a gift in it. There's an honoring to it. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. What else? What's another way of speaking about what a story is? Now you're being quiet. Okay, well, I can keep going. I just love to hear your voices. Okay. I saw Shannon nod. She's like, yeah, just keep going. Come on. Okay. So here's a very unromantic expression of what a story is. And an unromantic expression of it is it's an operating system. You know, and the way that I say that is because all humans have always used and compared their bodies to the latest technology. So there was a time when we referred to bodies as machines. Now we're in the language of computers. So, you know, carrying down that path. And so what lives in this operating system? It's a place where we learn our belief systems, our values, and what we believe is possible. So it often tells us, you know, what we should be on the lookout for in terms of distress. There's often warnings. There's the shoulds and should nots. But basically, they teach us how to live in the world. And so they're coming at us at all different times in our life. And they come to us from our families. They come to us from our coworkers. They come to us from our communities. And oftentimes stories have this really amazing piece where they're agreed upon. We consciously or unconsciously agree to stories. And if you think about your family, each of you probably has a role, an archetypal role that you could pinpoint and say, you know, we do this. And there's some kind of agreement in your family that you've all agreed to play these different roles. And then inevitably at some point in time, someone changes or shifts and they decide to change their role. And then it's mayhem. Even if it's good, there can be mayhem because once one thing changes, then another thing needs to change. So that's just like a very personal way of looking at how we are lived and lived by stories. Now, if that's what a story is, what's a sacred story? What distinguishes a sacred story? Anyone want to try that one? Jerry did start to hint at it. Yes, Shannon.
Thank you. It's technology. Sacred stories are here to gather people into a learning that will take us forward in a good way. So it is providing a vehicle to go from where we are now into a future that will hold us in a good way.
Mm-hmm. So what I hear you speaking to, Shannon, is around the intention behind what's been created. So this is something that's designed. She said, I'm just going to hold you. It's carrying you to the future. You know, she didn't say the word positive, but I'm going to say like a future that I want to live in. I'm going to imagine, right? That's a distinguishing piece right there. Right. So there's an intention in it, and there's some care and consideration and the kind of story that you just spoke to that lives inside this description of sacred story. Okay. Anyone else? Who else want to take their hand on what a sacred story is? Okay. What I understand as a sacred story is that it it holds life inside of it. And it's here to serve life as well. So a sacred story might have a little bit of, we all have different language for what is, let's say, source. I think source is a name, is a word that many people can relate to. But what one person calls source, another person might call God, another person might call the ancestors, another person might call the muse. But it's a life source that lives inside of the story. And what I understand about when I work with a sacred story, that it's kind of like the pressure's off. People think I'm crazy when I say this, where I'm like, well, it's not like it's all on me to get it right. What is on me is to listen deeply to what life wants to live inside the story. And what is on me as a conscious creator, and that's going to be something I'm going to invite you into over and over and over again in our time together, is to really decide what kind of creator are you, and are you a conscious creator that is very aware of what you are in service to. So I ask you that, just to answer for yourself right now. What is it that you're in service to? You might say, I'm in service to building community, or I'm in service to a thriving planet, or I'm in service to love, or whatever your thing is that you are in service to. I just said a bunch of positive things because that's the team that I'm playing with right now, but it's like, what it does is that when you are a conscious creator, and when you do open to work with sacred story and allowed to work with a story that has a life in it, then any old thing can happen. I one time heard someone say, well, I just opened my channel and, I just listened. And I'm like, gosh, there's a big universe out there. And there's a lot of different energies that have a lot of different intentions. And so, I make it really clear when I'm in that space of creating that I'm working with that sacred story, this piece that has a life that's here to serve life. And so in that story, there can be medicine, there can be healing, there can be the codes to remembering something, some other time in life. That's where stories that kind of hold a magic that are really unexplainable. So if you're like, well, that sounds nice and dandy and pretty darn simple, what's not a sacred story? And what I would call that is a zombie story. So a zombie story is a story that was not made with the intention to support life. And one of cautionary tales, the story of Jaws. Jaws was a book that was written by Peter Benchley, and it was picked up by Steven Spielberg. The first things that we want to do is we want to look at what was the intention of the people of the creator. What were the times that they were living in? What were they in service to? And what was that story in service to? So I actually don't know Peter Benchley's story about why he wrote that book, or how it came to him, or what he was thinking when he put it out there. I do know a little bit about Steven Spielberg's story, which was that it was the very, very first film that he ever made. He was very smart. We always talked about peripheral vision. We have to look at what's coming for us. It's like he tapped into some kind of something where we had to see that danger, that potential human danger, right? And I don't know if that's why people had to see it, but I often wonder, because you have to understand it in context and time too, that we didn't have violent movies then. I think Star Wars was one of the very first movies that was not a Western with guns, So it's like we entered into a new plateau of experiencing and seeing violence in our movies. And so one of the things that happened is that whether or not you speak, what Carl Jung speaks into the collective unconscious, it's like you're part of it. And so there are different pieces that evokes symbolism in our thinking, with or without our intention. So the ocean, which is where this film was created, very first one ever shot on the live ocean, is our collective consciousness. And that big metal shark that they made that was Jaws actually broke. And so they were good filmmakers, and they showed pieces of it. So then we got out of the literal form of it being a fake monster, and into the act of symbolism. And now the shark took on being the symbol of our fear of the unknown and our fear of death. And somewhere in there, it became globally acceptable to kill off this keystone species that we're all dependent upon for our health and wellness. And I don't think that anyone involved had the intention to do harm in the oceans or to humans. I really don't. And so that's why I say this is a cautionary tale. that as you step into the role of being creators and understanding that you will have a great impact, and that that story, as soon as it leaves your mouth, is no longer yours. It's now the person who has caught it, and they're going to tell it, and they're going to give it away. And it's going to continue and continue and continue. And so there's a great power and a great responsibility that comes with storytelling. So if we're talking about, that, now what I want to do is I want to show you a little bit about, like, what do stories do? A lot of this you guys are, I'm just reminding you of what you already know. Let's see here. Okay, good to see a script for, we're working on the very first huge ritual storytelling event on working with Medea and betrayal and forgiveness. So you just saw the script. We're going to be working on that this weekend. Okay, so the alchemy of story. What does story do? And it's not linear or literal. And I think that's one of the key things. So it builds connection. And this is a kind of an amazing thing. I just alluded to what happens between the storyteller and the listener. Now, there's an illusion that happens that the storyteller has the power. And they do, but maybe not in the ways that you actually think. Because really the person who has the most amount of power is the listener. It's just like any giving, receiving relationship. The real power is in the receiving. So one of the very first things that's very important as you prepare to tell your story is to make sure that people are in a space where they can listen. And you saw me, if you were at the very beginning of this class, you saw that happen. What did I have you do? I had you actually come present. I had you put all your attention on yourself, and I gave you a job to listen to some very specific things. So that means that you actually aren't listening to me in this talk. You're actually listening for yourself. It's a different kind of listening. And one of the amazing things that happens that they've discovered between the relationship of the storytelling and the listening is that, I spoke about this magic that I could feel, like this energy that was happening in the room. And, it's funny, I was just talking to a flamenco musician, and I said, he said the American audiences listen in a very different way than European audiences because they have more history. They understand what they're listening to with flamenco. And he's like, but when the listening is good, there's magic. And I was like, sorry, I just gave away my punchline. I was like, well, what does good listening sound like? He's like, there's magic in the room. And one of the things that I understand is that, that magic that I understand is when we do this crazy thing, we time travel, we location travel, we reality bend, we do all these things. And let's do a little example of that right now. So once upon a time, not so long ago, deep, deep, deep in the very bottom part of the ocean, there was this extraordinary stand of redwood trees growing, 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 all the way to the very tip of the ocean. So just at the very tippy top of the needle could be seen as the waves washed over it. And through that forest swam some of the biggest, largest whales that this earth has ever known. And there were dolphins that swam through. But on the ocean ground, what walked among those trees were clowns. So how many of you saw that image? You can just raise your hand if you saw that image. So again, we reality bended, we location traveled, we saw things that could never happen, as we know them. And so what I'm calling magic, in terms of what we've got all this investment in VR so that we can see something, which I would say might be cutting down our imagination, which is kind of scary to me. But our frontal lobe gets really activated, and the same part of my mind that saw that image actually lit up in the same part of your mind, in the same part of your frontal lobe. They both get activated. And so what I'm calling magic, Princeton actually calls neural coupling. And something to understand about storytelling is that our minds are rather sophisticated, our consciousness, we don't even know where it comes from, right? And it can move and it can change and it can shift, it can do all different kinds of things. But our brains are very easily fooled. And so our brains, when we see something violent, our body takes it in as something like traumatic, like your body seizes and you go through a fear response and you have all these spikes. But the same thing when you watch a romantic film, they're so fun because the serotonin starts flowing and you're just having a great time and you're getting the sensation of falling in love. So they're very, very powerful, and they actually have biological effects on our bodies. Eldership lives in our stories. And what I mean by eldership, it's not about how old you are, but it's a mentality. And it's a mentality of, someone said that stories can carry you. It's an understanding that, that when we speak, our voice matters. And how do we use it? And that we are of consequence. And so as we walk this path of eldership, understanding that we are of consequence, and I really do want to honor the great Stephen Jenkinson right now, who is a great proponent of understanding that we are all people of consequence and that we matter. That there's a way in which what stories you choose to tell and what stories you don't choose to tell. And when you choose to tell a story, when you don't choose to tell a story. And understanding that you could be giving the wisdom that people really need to get through a hard time. So you start to understand the responsibility of sharing your wisdom. I've been thinking about the Me Too movement. And as I started to see all these collective stories and the repetition, I was like, one of the big things that I felt grief around was that if more women shared their stories earlier on, rather than have the shame and keep them in privacy, that perhaps the younger generations wouldn't have had to experience the same kinds of disruptions in their lives. So I began to understand more and more the responsibility of sharing your experiences. Belonging happens, and this is, just a beautiful thing in terms of, when people speak their truth, when people share what they really are, not the cookie cutter, this is what life is supposed to be like, and they say, well, maybe I'm not going to fake a role that I don't actually feel in this other story. I'm actually going to be the truth of what I am. The more that people share those stories, the more it liberates others to speak the truth of who they are. I feel like we're at a time that's really alive and coming out more and more. Healing lives in our stories. And I feel like this is actually very complex, and I do entire courses just in this very thing. And I feel like there's a couple of different ways with working with stories in the healing modality. There's let's say I need a healing. I'm very confused about something. I have a lot of pain about something, and Starhawk came, and she was a guest teacher in one of our classes this past year, and she's put to words something that I had done, but I'd never known how to put the words to. And she said, when I'm working with a really big problem, rather than try to go figure it out literally, I take it to a story and I work it out in the story to find the answer. And so if you've read her book, The Fifth Sacred Thing, that's what she was doing. She was working on a really big problem that wouldn't leave her alone. And so there's a way where you can say, okay, I want to write this for myself. I want to figure something out, or I have a broken heart and I really want to give myself a healing. So you can actually choose to create a story that has the resonance that your beingness most needs to have. Because I'm introducing some very complicated topics, which means that you guys must be all ready, because I don't normally speak in this great depth of it. So, but I trust that in the listening, again, the listening calls out what will be spoken. And then there's the healing in terms of wisdom stories, where you've gone through something, you've crossed a major threshold, you're on the other side, and you want to go throw some breadcrumbs back to the people behind you and show them how, the easiest route through. And so that's another way. And then there's also working with severe PTSD or something, where you do a form of reflection and working. But if you do that, then they say don't ever write for more than 20 minutes, because in those 20 minutes, you can get into the state of reflection where you can start to move and see things differently. More than 20 minutes, you can get into the rabbit hole and end up reliving the situation. And so one of the most profound things that I understand about story, and when you go in to work with a point of major trauma or something that's been very disruptive in your life, is that there's an opportunity for the story to change. And I'm not saying make up falsities or make up lies or make it the way that you always wanted it to be rather than what it was, but that just like a tree, a tree grows, and it at the beginning of its life, it sucks all the resources up, and it grows, and then it creates shade and fruit and all of that. We expect it to change. So why on earth wouldn't we expect our stories to change as we grow and evolve? They should be changing, because we're going to have more and more perspective, more and more wisdom, and our role in our what we see the story as being can change and shift as we change and shift. So one of the greatest things and offerings I might add right now is that if you do have a very traumatic event and you've repeated it over and over again, you might want to really consider just trying to tell that story in a different way. Bridges, I think that this whole thing is just talked about, that they're bridges to the past, bridges to the future, bridges to the heart. And I really feel like love lives in the stories. And this is, I have never ever been in a room of people where they told their stories and I did not fall in love with them. I don't know the research on heart connections and heart opening, but I do know that, when speaking with someone, especially of different political perspective, so oftentimes we can get into a fight of, not my way, that's not my story, this is the right story, blah, blah, blah. We go into this facts and information, and what I love to do is I love to play it. What stories, what life experiences got to people thinking that way? And it's a fun way to engage, because it's like, it's not my job to change someone else's mind, but it is my job to understand the people that I live and share this planet with. And so with that, this place of, I always say the biggest job of any storyteller, it's not the telling. The telling is like the very tail end. The biggest job is the listening. They say that, with one of the great things that we've noticed, and especially become aware of finally in Hollywood and our country, is that when we show only one race as the predominant in the movies and the commercials and everything, we're actually denying the existence and ignoring all the others. And that ignoring is one of the greatest punishments that every indigenous culture ever enacted. When someone was acting out, they ignored them. So we understand that the role of the storyteller is in the seeing and reflecting back what is really in their world. It's one of the gifts that you can give people, because as storytellers, we give them also the gift of their existence. We say, I see you. I see your beauty. I see your love. I see your pain. I see your transformation. And that's what we're giving back to people when we tell these stories. Okay, so any questions right now? You want to build a little story together? Yeah, I'm seeing smiles. That's good. Okay. I feel like I was going to play with betrayal and forgiveness with you guys, but I feel like let's do a wisdom story, because I feel like that is probably what just feels right for the telling right now. And so here's what you're going to do with your wisdom story. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you sort of like the instructions for how to do it, and then you can write it or like right after class, but I'm going to give you the outline for how to do it. So the beginning is, where does the story really begin? Where does the story really begin? So when I tell a story about, my experience with thyroid cancer, that story did not begin on the day that I found the piece on my throat or when I went to the doctor. That story actually began when I was 5 years old. And in my bedroom, there was this beautiful tapestry that had been created by a friend of my mother's. And it was of this woman who was giving flowers, bouquets of flowers, out to a group of children. And there were these words on that tapestry. And it said, "Give what you have, Leah. To someone else, it may mean more than you dare to think." And I remember being a little kid and being like, "Give what you have, Leah, give what you have. It may mean more than you dare to think." And I was young and I was just learning how to read and I didn't know what I had, but it made an impression, probably because I didn't understand it, until I was 30 years old, sitting across this brown desk from this doctor in a white coat who's giving me this huge pack of paper to sign away what I soon to discover, which is that I very well might lose my voice in the course of this operation. And all of a sudden I realized what I had. So again, that's an example of the archetype of the storyteller is the Weaver Dreamer or the spider. It's the connecting the dots through linear time. Stories are not linear. We're making meaning. So, and we're multidimensional in our approach. So one of my favorite questions is, where does the story really begin? And when you go in for that question, again, when you're creating a sacred story, you're doing it, and you're doing it as a collaboration, right? So it's not like scrunching your eyebrows together and, you know, trying to figure it out. It's like taking it for a walk, taking a bath, taking a shower, doing the dishes. I get so many ideas when I do the dishes. And just with that wondering, with the authentic wonder, where does it really begin? And then it's going to come to you, and you're going to be like, oh my God, that's so clever. I wish I'd thought of that myself. You know, and it's that kind of collaboration and allowing something more than what you knew to come through you. I had no idea I was so wise. Maybe because you weren't. Maybe it's just because you're a really great listener, and now that wisdom gets to come through you, and you're the first one to get to give it out. You know, I always think I'm just the first one that got the memo. So we got that. Now you're gonna really think about a lot of times is what threshold are you crossing? And I think Jerry said all stories need to have a universal truth in them. John Steinbeck says, unless a storyteller is actually about the listener, it will not last. So when you look for the story, if I told you a story about getting thyroid cancer, you know, snore, snore. Only the people that are dealing with it are going to have any interest in it, and probably not even. But if I tell you the universal story about that moment, when that man looked me in the eye and told me I might lose my voice, all of a sudden, it was as if this escape hatch opened up in the room. Because you have to understand that before this moment, I had mastered being and playing the role of the archetype. I mean, I had it down. I could out-victim story anybody in the room. And here was this opportunity that was inviting me to step in and play the role to a whole new level. And I decided I didn't want it. I wanted something else. And I jumped through that escape hatch, not knowing where I was going. I didn't know if I was going for hero. I didn't know if I was going for, I didn't know. I was jumping into the mystery. I just knew that I was never, ever going to play that role again. So again, what are we talking about? Is we're talking about rites of passage. And these rites of passages, you know, at different times in indigenous cultures, when they had a more active, engaged relationship with the earth, they had and acknowledged many, many, many of the rites of passages that we go through in life. Now in our modern day culture, you know, we get birth. Some people get, 13. Some people get marriage. We all get death. But there's a lot of other ones in between. And our stories can carry that experience and expression of making meaning of those. So again, for me, that was a rites of passage. I got an opportunity. So again, what is your story really about? What is the universal wisdom? Because everyone at some point in their life is going to come face to face with a moment where they're going to make a choice, and it happens faster than a blink of an eye. And so you might be able to prepare them for that moment. Who are your mentors? Who are your unexpected guides? They're always there in the good stories, right? This journey, no journey, some journeys you have to start on, you have to take the first steps by yourself on your own. That's a very classic hero's journey expression. The feminine, the heroine's journey is she actually does it in collective. There's a whole other story, whole other class, but they're very different story structures. And one of the things that, with your story, if you're going to escape the hero's journey teaches us that we have to have a monster outside of us. So this is dangerous. You can see it in our politics. If we're gonna continue that path, where the only way we can see the truth of what we are and what we're capable of, we're gonna have to make a monster that's gonna be outside of us. Again, very masculine structure of story. Fun fact, our Western culture is one of the very few cultures that actually romanticizes heroes. Many other cultures know that heroes are very dangerous. So it's maybe what's another model. The heroine's model is actually coming back into the self, going to see what is in the self that wants to die or come alive. And that's where you get to come through. So again, who are your allies? Who are your allies on your journey? And they can be unexpected. It might be a family member. It might be a best friend. It might be a stranger on the street that speaks to you. For me, it was a garden. When I got out of the hospital, they had me on the wrong medication, and I was kind of on speed. And it was great. I just came out and I was like jumping around and had all this energy. And I called my friends over and I was like, let's build a 70-foot circular garden. And they're like, Leah, that's crazy. You're just one day out of the hospital. And I'm like, yeah, but I got this energy, so I might as well use it while I got it. And so we did that. And thank God, because, you know, very soon after I did get on the right meds and all the energy went out the door and I sunk into a deep depression. And that garden is what saved me. Every morning I would walk the spirals of that garden, and I kid you not, that land taught me the act of gratitude. It wasn't like it is now where people all talk about gratitude and gratitude practice. I had no idea what gratitude was, no concept of it. But somehow, and it really is a mystery to me, I learned how to say that I was grateful, and I learned how to say thank you for everything that I had as I walked the inner spirals of that garden. And then on the way out, I said my prayers. And that's where I learned how to pray, was with that land and with that garden. So again, your allies can come in many different shapes and forms. And so it's that listening for what got you through, what helped you cross this threshold. Now, you can just run off and write this story in 10 minutes. And you think I'm crazy, but I'm not. You can really just like harvest wisdom and brilliance and genius. You know, Michael Mead says the genius lives in us. And I always say, don't be afraid of this word genius. It's not Einstein. Einstein actually knew what genius was. It was just the energy that runs through him. You know, we all have genius running through. So again, it's that place of wonderment and being open. And if you're feeling stuck, you just get up, you know, you unstuck your body and you go to the bathroom. I worked with this great director one time and he said, oh, we always know the best ideas happen in the bathroom. You know, so you get up, you go to the bathroom, you come back, you keep writing. Now, you can get through the structure pretty easily, but getting to the ending, that takes skill and that can take time. And there's a couple of different techniques. You can somehow tie the beginning of, you know, the end of your story to the beginning. You know, that there's some brilliance in there. It's very satisfying for some of us. Or you might want to end with a story of blessing. And I learned this technique from Carolyn Casey, and she learned it from John Donahue, and he, I think, got it from the Kabbalah tradition. So again, I always say, and you've seen me do this many times, and I invite you to do this in your own storytelling. Name where you learned things. Name the origin of your story. Name the people that you got it from, because what you're doing is you're creating a place for yourself on this great path of great work. And all these people come before you, and you call on them as you do your own. So this thing that I now am telling you about is called a story blessing. And you take sort of a metaphor that kind of represents your story. Then you bless the audience with it. So, you know, for example, you might say, so if you find yourself in the middle of a dark and stormy ocean and your ship has sunk and you feel all is lost and all alone in the world, then may the light of the moon cast a great path for you safely to shore. And may you be met with warm food and warm blankets and a story to carry you through. So again, it's just simple. You just bless your audience, and who doesn't enjoy being blessed? And you just, boom, you just ended it just like that. You wrote a story in 10 minutes. So here's what's going to happen next. I am about to end our class together, and I'll end it by reading a quote. And because you always start and end with the words of others, because it's a good thing to do to honor those people who have spent and committed so much of their life and time to the good word, as you are too. And then for those of you who just came for the class, I will bid you adieu. And if you came and you got to hear something and you're just kind of tickled by this idea of working with sacred storytelling, and you want to learn more about other courses, then I'll be staying on for a little bit long and I'll talk to you about what's coming up on February 28th and in other classes. And so that's what's going to happen. All right. So let me come back to my little quote machine over here. Ha, whoops, hold on. Gosh. This is one of my absolute favorite quotes in the world. And this is by Stephen Jenkinson. And this is how it goes. Act as if you are people of consequence so that I can treat you as such, and you matter. What must have happened to people who unconsciously agreed that the best presence in this world is to have no consequence in this world? It's a velvet gauntlet, this idea of being of consequence. It doesn't clink when it hits the ground, but you can feel it. It would be proper to proceed that there is consequence to us being here. So that is your quote of the day. So I thank you so much for being with us. And now I'll just say a couple of words and go create your stories like right now. Like just you've got it. It's fresh in your mind. And then for those of you who are curious about what is next, I'm going to show you what is next. I'm going to give you, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you the link so that you can have the link. Also, I'll just say, if you are on Facebook and you're one of those people that likes to hang out there, you can always look up the Story Sanctuary. And that's a Facebook group that I have. And we have a small but mighty group that is, speaking this language of sacred storytelling there. Okay, and if you have any questions, by all means, I'll thank you everyone that's saying thank you. If you have any questions during this, you can just pop out your voice and I'll hear you. So I'm going to share my screen with you and share you this page. So I run a couple of different online courses, and I've really just become absolutely passionate about teaching online, mostly because I get to hang out with Canadians. I have a lot of Canadians in my courses. But also there's been something rather phenomenal to be, in the heart of California and what's being created here, and be able to share it into the world and be able to have people from all around the globe that are meeting on a certain issue, be able to have this time together. And you guys didn't get to do a lot of talking today, but I've always been amazed and awed about this new technology that we get to use for us, where we can hear each other's voices and we can have very intimate experiences. And so when I do these courses, I talk a lot less, and I hand over much more of the reins to you guys. They're very experiential, and you get to work in groups of 2, sometimes in groups of 4, and then as a whole. So the amazing technologies that I can put you in small rooms together, and you can have these one-on-one experiences. So I really have come to love this as a form. And so this course came through, and I teach another one called Speak with Spark. I think that one starts, and that one I share with a lot of other master teachers. This one I teach, and it's really about, it's the first time I'm teaching this, so that it's unique in that you are able to either take one course or sign up for the entire series. And what this is I really started to realize that, as I mentioned before, we don't have many markers for the initiations of life. But it doesn't mean that they aren't happening. And the way that we tell our stories is the way that we live our stories. And so when we are able to come through each of these different initiations and meet them with our eyes wide open and look at all the shadows that are living in the stories and look at all the possibility and look at our power and how we tell them, and understand that in moving and working with a story, great worlds can open up to us. And it's not always easy. I always say, like, when you go in for an initiation, I can make no promises. That's my truth speak to you. I'm not gonna, I promise you that you're not gonna become sexier. I promise you that you might not make any more money. I promise you, like, all of these things are none of my promises. This is clearly not me being a great marketer, but what I do promise is that you'll go into the mystery, and you will get to explore and see things that you never have before. And what I understand about rites of passage and initiation is that you can't do it on your own. It's designed inherently to be done in community, to be done in a way that you're able to learn from others, you're able to be witnessed. And it's really something to get to see people change and take form and be held, and people rooting for your greatness as you step into these big stories. So we just did our first one. It was the story of birth. It was really beautiful. And it was, we just did our final, what we do is we meet for one day, and it's 9 hours. So it's a long day. And what I'll say is we actually take lots of breaks. So, you'll get to take a walk in nature at some point and integrate. You'll get to have some solo time to create. You'll get some time to work in a group. And this was a really beautiful class. This class is actually required for anyone to be able to watch the video so that you can actually do the foundational work for this entire series. And then all the other classes, what you see is there's actually 11 of them, is that you can then take one or you can take all of them and go on the complete journey. And our next one is coming up is the story of love. And so we're going to go on a rescue mission, and we're going to release the story of love as it's been kidnapped and forced into something very small by Walt Disney and Hallmark, and really allow it to live in the truth of what it is. And love is a very complicated energy. There's a good reason why a lot of people are afraid of love. It's a force to be reckoned with. So we're really going to come into the energy of what is love? How does it live in our lives? Where has it been denied? Where is it asking to live in ways that we perhaps haven't allowed it to come in? And really explore your own relationship to love. Then we're going to go into the story of receiving. We're looking at what are the key things, the key stages, as we come into the world. We're birthed, and some people live in families where they receive a ton of love, and so they come into relationship with that. One of the first things that we do as humans is we're given the opportunity to learn how to receive. Strange but true, they actually say that Americans, more than any other culture, have a very hard time truly receiving. And I would guess perhaps because there's such a long history of taking. And so it's really hard to take, to receive when you know that inherently there's been so much taking. So we're going to look at, as we come into the energy of the story of receiving, we're going to come back and look at where are you in that. What is your story of worthiness? Where is your story of guilt living? How is your story of value emerging? And we're going to look at all the different barriers that you might have that are on the way to you stepping fully into being able to receiving. So of course, on the other side of receiving is giving. And now we're looking at what is it to actually be and live in the house of your genius. What is it to also come across the story of fear, the story of doubt, the story of the critic, as they might get in the way of you standing on the fullness, the wholeness of you giving your gifts to the world. So I'm not going to go through all of these, or they're just the next couple of months, but as you see, there's a story of power, there's a story of rebirth, there's a story of communion, and I'd say right now, this is a big one. How do we know how to bring people together? And then for the very, very final one is the story of alchemy. That is only for people who go through the entire series, so they get to alchemize all the different stories. So what I can say is I look at this and I'm like, wow, yeah, these sound intense, abandonment, death. But to me, there is so much pleasure and joy. When you look at what is abandonment, you actually look at the etymology of it. It's a choice to give up something and to relinquish control. And so, of course, that has to be, as we look towards, if we ever enter the story of death, then we have to go into the conscious choice to be able to know that we can actually let go and relinquish control. So this is, there's a real design and setup for all of them. So that is, again, you can either register for the one that you want or for the whole series. And it's a good time to jump in for the whole series, because you will get the whole video series of the birth class, which leaves you as not a participant in it, but you can actually just do all the activities. And that is that. And I can stay on for any questions. And then if, other ways that if you feel called to this, but maybe a class is not your thing, I work one-on-one with people with story priestessing, where I call it more than story coaching, because as you now know, I feel like story is more than just the one, the 6 bullet points of how to tell a story, but it involves us knowing all parts of ourselves. And then also I do a work called soul stories, which is a form of mystic storytelling. And I'll give you the link to that in here as well. Whew, so much talking. Are there any questions that anyone has about anything that's come up so far? Okay. Well then, I will bid you adieu. I love that someone's Zoom handle is I'm in. That's great. And let's see, we must have been reading each other's minds. If you're in the middle of a story, does your one-on-one sessions help? Okay, so the question is if you're in the middle of working with a story, would a coaching session help? And or one-on-one sessions. And so, yeah, I mean, when I work on my really big stories, I work with a story coach myself, and I find that having someone that can really help you focalize what you're working on and make sure that you understand what's the underlying story that you're telling, because a lot of times we can get a lot of different things can come in. It helps you with your character development. Yeah, you're always welcome to, I should give you my scheduling link. And you can always schedule an information session. These are 20-minute sessions where we can just do a quick assessment in terms of what's right for you. And oh gosh, unfortunately I'm not coming up with my 30-minute sessions here. I'm not coming up with my 20-minute sessions, so you're going to get my 30-minute session. I usually do information sessions that are 20 minutes.
Leah, I just want to say to you how much I have appreciated listening to you.
Oh.
And what you've done for me is to give me another lens to look through, because I've been looking at my story from here and I know that it's not effective, but it needs to be told. And so by looking at it from a different point of view, I feel you've got things percolating in me again.
Mm.
And truly, I cannot tell you how grateful I am for that.
Mm. With pleasure. With pleasure.
I write about the magic in ordinary moments. I call it Mom. And it happens for all of us. And today, your email came up in my feed, and it was, oh, so that's what I'm supposed to be doing today. Very magical. And thank you so much for all your wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I love how it can work so beautifully. And you're getting a comment in the chat section, just so you know, in response to what you just said. Oh, right. Yes.
I have a question. I'm curious if you could speak briefly to reworking stories in terms of like orally telling a story, and then just the process of reassessing how it was told and being like, oh, well, that didn't really work, and just how you do that. And maybe it's because it wasn't, it didn't reach the audience in an effective way or something like that. But for whatever reason, it wants to be reworked and retold.
Okay. So, one of the great things that you do when when I'm hearing you say, and tell me if I missed this, but I'm hearing you say, okay, there's a, I'm going to reword it. So having the experience of telling a story and something in you knows it didn't quite land. And then how do you go back and how do you rework it? Is that right?
Yes, yes, yes.
So one of the great things is that our audience will tell us immediately if something is landing or not. And as a storyteller, and especially in the form of oral storytelling, you have this amazing moment to catch in the moment. So if something isn't landing, your audience tells you in ways that they don't intend to, but they'll start to shuffle, they'll start to cough, they'll start to sneeze, and you'll literally see a ruffle move through the room. Not that I know anything about this, but this is what happens, you know? And so, and it happens to everybody. And so as a storyteller, there's a couple of different things. The biggest job, and I didn't talk about this, is actually preparing your audience to listen, because if they're not settled and quiet, then you can never get to that magic moment where you're all traveling together. And so one of the things that you can do is literally how to prepare your audience. And so one of the ways that you prepare them is you can create, I call it a Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore moment. And the moment they walk in the door, something is different. Either you're greeting them, you're looking them in the eye. When I do talks at Google, I give people roses when they walk in the door. When I do sacred storytelling events, I have people sit in a circle, so now they're participants. We drop roses over the heads. You know, I'm doing a ritual storytelling event this weekend, and we're having people come in and they're going to take water, they're going to pick up water, and we're going to give them this task, and they have to go deliver the water somewhere else. And so immediately life is different. And so you have got their attention, your focus. So I'm not exactly talking what you want, but I'm getting my way there. So, you know, and if you're losing your audience, you know, and you start noticing that and you become aware and you start having that huge fear where you're like, oh my God, here I am on the stage and I've lost them, you know, you can renegotiate. So there's a couple of things that can happen right away, which is you can slow everything down. And you can just find your breath again and do this deep listening. And there's the moment of trust, ultimate epic trust that you're going to get the divine inspiration to really go to the spot that needs to be spoken to next. Because your audience is calling what you're going to speak to. And if you're really tuned into them, you're going to start speaking in ways through your story that you've never spoken before. Because the story is alive and it's coming alive in the listening. So I'm not advocating for lazy storytelling and not knowing your story inside and out, but I am saying something magical can happen. If you're noticing that you've lost people, it's because you're not speaking to them. So there's that. Again, that's kind of an advanced skill, but I'm speaking to it. And then if you're literally saying, hey, my story just didn't work that well, you know, then go back to the beginning and really look at, are you telling a journey? Does your story have universal themes? Are you, you know, are you being essential with your language? You know, are you allowing the gift of eloquence to come in? It's hard to say without actually knowing what story you're working with, but those are some of the things that I would listen for.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you. What you're sharing is very helpful, and this whole session has been incredibly helpful to me. So thank you. And I'm curious if I heard that it was being recorded. Will you be sharing? Because I'd love to revisit the quotes and your words.
Yes, it is being recorded and it's going to be sent out.
Wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. All right. I will wish you all adieu. Is there any other questions? Lovely. I love seeing your faces. It makes my day. And I love seeing all your other names. That's also quite lovely. And I love to take everyone off mute and we can just say goodbye together. So there you go. Farewell. Have a lovely day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Leah.
You're welcome.